Hey everybody. Everybody see me? Am I good? I think I'm good. I don't know about anybody else, but I always find giving presentations to a screen to be just really, really interesting compared to giving presentations live. It's a totally different feel. So for people that do this a lot, mad props to all of you. I'm going to get started now. At some point, I might even have slides on the screen. Yeah, all right. Hi, everybody. So if you're here, that means you want to hear about designing for complex content, which if you can see this slide right now, I love this image. It's actually an image of stained glass that represents the entire light spectrum. I just think what a really gorgeous way of talking about something super complex in a simple way that everybody understands. So I think it's a perfect visual metaphor for what we're going to be doing. First of all, hi, I'm Michelle, and it looks just like me, except I do not actually have that tattoo. That is not a real tattoo. I wish it was. I'm not that ballsy, but I think it's kind of clever. My background is in design, so I went to school for that. That's what I studied, and nowadays I'm usually doing WordPress design and front-end development. And what I want to talk to you about is stuff that I learned about from the perspective of a designer. And the first thing I want to talk to you about is simplicity. I want to talk to you a little bit about what that is. And first of all, I want to talk to you about the concept of simplicity, right? The concept of simplicity in design is basically boiling content and design down to its essence and letting everything else get out of the way. It's kind of the holy grail of design. So we think of like, oh, Apple, like everything's very simple and beautiful and white and they don't have any extraneous stuff. On the flip side of that, though, is the trend of simplicity. And I saw this screenshot on Twitter a while ago, and I just thought it was hilarious. It's a bunch of just different agency websites. And nowadays, it seems like simplicity means it has to look a certain way, meaning it has a photo and a video with a button and a couple of links on it, right? Like we've all seen this. And the other thing about simplicity is it's starting to become synonymous with showing less content and less information. And maybe on agency websites, that's totally okay because, they're portfolio sites. There's not a lot to show. But this example here, you don't have to be able to read this, but it's basically a sitemap that I did for a client site where there are just different kind of content types and taxonomies. And you can see that with this level of information, a button and a couple links just won't work. It just won't work. There's way too much going on here. I'm going to resize this real quick so that it's more zoomed in. There we go. So here's a really great example of a super complex interface, right? Like flying an airplane. If you and I walked in there and we had to fly an airplane, it would be extremely overwhelming. There is a ton of data there. It's super complex. So what would the traditional designer response be to walking into an airplane cockpit, right? Like this is much more perfect, right? To us as the designer, like, yeah, we got rid of, there's way too many extra like buttons and knobs and dials and stuff. This is way simpler. You just see like the things that show whether you're parallel to the ground and maybe a map and your speed, but everything else is extraneous, right? Well, what happens if we need that other data and it's hidden or inaccessible? Like we probably might need that in certain situations. So what's a designer do? It's perfect now, right? Now it's exactly perfect. We've got a hamburger menu and we can access everything whenever we want. The problem with this though is obviously in order to go through this hamburger menu, that's going to be a loss of critical time and a possible catastrophic failure. And I know I wouldn't want my pilots to have to access all the extra controls behind a hamburger menu when I'm flying a plane. So the point here is that context matters a lot when it comes to simplicity. And what I think is simple is not the same thing as what a pilot thinks is simple. So I've got a super great quote here. Basically, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So we don't need fluff content. We don't need content that is there just for the sake of content, but we don't want to get rid of good content or data just for the sake of looking simple. And so that's where we've got this concept of forced simplicity versus embracing complexity. And I'm hoping to sell you on embracing this complexity. Forced simplicity is basically, it's hidden, you have a bunch of clicks to get to it, it's counterintuitive, you're missing information. And so basically the consequences of forcing simplicity on non-simple content is you end up with this super frustrating experience. Like on mobile sites where you can't access everything, that's a huge pet peeve of mine. Like, no, I am sitting on my phone and my computer's 5 feet from me, but I don't feel like getting it. I want to purchase your thing. Please don't hide that from me. That's an example of forced simplicity that's very, very frustrating. On the other side, embraced complexity is basically, we want to empower the user to control the experience. So it's not agent directed, meaning I'm not telling them what to do. They're deciding what they want to do. They want it to be scannable. They want everything to be accessible. And nowhere is this struggle more apparent than in enterprise software, which is usually the most like complex and convoluted software out there. And enterprise software is a little bit unique. And that's because there's usually a high level of risk involved. There's usually a large scale involved. It's usually part of a larger ecosystem, so it has to integrate with multiple departments. There's several workflows. There's many other pieces of software that talk to it. So enterprise software is kind of this big, complex thing. And enterprise users are kind of unique too. First of all, the software is usually focused on specialized or industry-specific knowledge. So it's maybe stuff that you or I wouldn't necessarily know, what that is, but they know what it is. Often the use is mandated, like they don't really have a choice. They have to use it for their job. It's mission critical. They probably have to use it every day. Any individual might only interact with a small portion of that software, or they might only be interacting with it on certain devices, such as only on a desktop or only on a Windows machine, although that part of it is changing as jobs become more mobile and flexible. Enterprise users are accustomed to needing onboarding for complex situations, but this is not an excuse for crappy software, because confusing software, no matter how proprietary it is, no matter how much specialized knowledge the users have, completely wastes time. So there's a few special things that I like to think about when we're talking about designing for the enterprise that might be a little bit than designing for more of a boutique or a smaller business. First of all, in enterprise design, efficiency is more important than beauty. And what I mean is that the most beautiful thing is the design decision that saves the most time. If you think about it, if you have a task that you have to do over and over again as part of your job, and more efficiently designed software can cut the time down that it takes from 4 minutes to 2 minutes, you now have a 100% increase in the available time that you have. And vice versa, if it makes the task harder to complete, you have now decreased your available time. And so changing your design for the sake of making it appear beautiful is less important than changing your design to make it more efficient for the person to use it. Also, being frictionless is better than being delightful. The delight here as an enterprise software user is that you've got joy when things actually work, right? Or work seamlessly without breaking. You have joy when things actually make sense. They are where you expect them to be. You have joy working across necessary devices and systems. Again, especially as jobs become more flexible and people are using bring your own device and stuff like that. But enterprise software is not special snowflake. We actually do see similar data complexity in consumer applications, probably many things that you guys also interact with on a daily basis. First example, newspapers. Newspapers have always been complex content because they're always constantly trying to communicate a lot at once, and they need to be easily scannable so that you can see exactly what the top stories are very quickly. Another example is niche markets. So a niche user usually has specialized knowledge and expects to find certain information. This is like a company that does, oh my God, what do they call it? Like telephone networking and stuff like that. But you can see on this page, like it's not a complex looking design, but there's a lot of stuff here. You can see related products. You can download security information. You can view related information. You can see what category it's in. You can see other related stuff. You can see some of the specs for it, all in this one page. So there's a lot of data here. Obviously, another big one is e-commerce. As an example, like there's tons of stuff. There's all kinds of categories and images and specs and sizes. There's lots of different things that you have to deal with in e-commerce. And obviously another one we deal with a lot is admin screens. So this is my admin screen for my website. You can see it's a super attractive pink color because that's pretty much the best color. But you can see how much data is here, right? I can see my site stats, I can see my WooCommerce orders, I can see all the different stuff I've published, I can see all the different post types I have. It's all in one place. There's a lot of complexity here, but it's not unattractively designed. So the real question here is basically, how do we be complex? How do we show all of this information without being complicated and having an impossible to use user interface? So Edward Tufte is one of the world's leading authorities on the visual display of complex information. Basically, you could just take away from this presentation, just do whatever he says, and you'd probably be fine. But he says clutter and overload are not an attribute of information. They are failures of design. If the information is in chaos, instead fix the design. That means having the data is not the problem. And it's our job as designers to reduce the clutter, not the content. Don't take away the content just because we are struggling as designers to have less clutter. That's cheating. So how do we do that? Obviously, at first, following good design principles is the first thing. And this is not a talk on what those are, how to use them, but obviously stuff like making sure that you're aligning things, use the fewest variations possible, especially when you have a lot of content. You want the content to stand out and not all your extra design elements. So probably the more content you have, the less design elements you want to be using, because a distracting user interface is a fail. A good example of this was the redesign of Weather Underground a little while ago. So on the left was the original site, and you can see there's just boxes around everything. There's a billion things, there's ads, it's just kind of chaotic. Now, Weather Underground is a weather site for people that are weather nerds, right? Like, they're super into it. So they want to see all the data and statistics and numbers and stuff. This isn't like Weather Channel or Dark Sky where you just want to see one or two things. Like, this is, I want to see all the data. And so they reorganized this. And you can see that there's still a lot of data here. There's still a bunch of numbers, a bunch of stuff. There's even still advertising. They didn't get rid of the advertising, but it is a much cleaner and easier to scan design. It's much simpler to see what city you're in, what the temperature is now, what the 10-day forecast is, but you can still see all the extra stuff. So this is a great example of minimizing visual noise. You also want to follow conventions and use patterns, because this helps to rely on knowledge that the user already has. So as an example here, there's a couple of different carts. On the left, there's a cart for purchasing a shirt. On the right, there's one for purchasing a speaker. But they both have similar things. They've got add to cart buttons or add to bag. You can favorite stuff. You can add stuff to a wish list. You can see reviews. You can see the quantity, descriptions, categories. So they're using similar patterns and stuff that you're expecting to find when you're on an e-commerce site. Also, make sure that you're following your own patterns internally. So you want your site to be a consistent visual experience and a consistent interactive experience. And this is especially important when you're breaking convention, like if you're doing something a little bit clever or creative. Because a user, once they learn how to use their thing, they want to be able to use it the same way in multiple places. So again, not only are they applying their previous knowledge of other websites to your site, but they're applying their knowledge of your own site to your site. So follow your own patterns internally. And that's whether that's between pages or from desktop to mobile to tablet to whatever. Be consistent with your own patterns. There's also a design technique called chunking, and that is where you're grouping like information together to make it more digestible. Because we are actually capable of viewing a lot at once. This is a really good example of viewing tons of numbers all in one place with not too many design elements. There's really only a few design elements separating the information, like these little blocks. Everything else is grouped together and you can tell that it's related. Another example of chunking is actually the Apple site. So remember that super simple site that we were talking about before? Actually, it's an e-commerce site, right? So there's a lot of stuff. If you scroll down on the Apple site, you can see that it makes it really easy to be able to compare one device to another, look at all the different specs across the way. It breaks up into even further columns as you go down. I really like how they were able to make this scannable. So the point is that as designers, we want to make sure our information is readable, we want to make sure information is accessible, and we want to make sure that information is logical. There is a concept that Edward Tufte discusses called being adjacent in space. And what that means is that all of your content or information is accessible in one pane or within a non-reloading action like a scroll or a swipe. Again, adjacent in space information, when you present it this way, is nice because it is controlled by the user, it's easily scannable, and it's accessible data. So what are some examples of this? I'm sure the first one most of you will guess is a phone screen. Apple and Android both have this kind of all accessible in one place thing. You swipe between the screens, you can see everything all at once, you've got all your options. Another example of this is card-based layouts. Now, I mean, feel how you will about them. Also, I don't know why these are the things that it picked for me. Apparently, this is what I'm into. I don't know what this says about me. But card-based layouts are a very specific kind of information. They do not work for everything, but they are a way of presenting a ton of information at once. Another one which people actually kind of love to hate are the mega menus. And I actually want to make a case for the appropriateness of mega menus in certain situations. I think they make a lot of sense in larger scale e-commerce projects or catalogs which have a lot of different information, a lot of different products. In this case, the highest level is always visible, and each one has many sub options. Now, we can't just throw a bunch of stuff in there and call it a day. Like, we still have to make choices and make design decisions showing how do we group these, what's the way that makes it most sense, how do we show them, how many menu items are there, how many subgroups are there. But the cool thing about mega menus is that they don't have to be like this. This one's a little bit different. I thought it was kind of cool. So they sell custom like closets and wardrobes. And if I was just looking at this as words, I'd be like, classic Oriental, quintessential, high gloss. Like, I have no idea what that means, but they have these little pictures to go with them. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I totally get how those are actually different from each other. So this is kind of like a cool mega menu that's taking advantage of more visual presentation. So on the flip side to this adjacent in space concept is the concept of stacked in time content. And that is content where you have to progress through a series of screens or actions to get there. And that means that information is hidden and the user is not empowered. And the first thing most people think of is the wizards, right, from old school Microsoft days. This presentation is also staged disclosure because you guys have absolutely no control over the order or duration of this presentation. I have all the power and it feels pretty good, I have to say. But this is not an ideal user experience for you guys because you guys have to wait till I'm done talking before I go to the next slide. So the pushback that I get a little bit is, isn't this going to be confusing? Like, isn't showing all of this data going to be way too hard for our average user? And I wanna take you through a little bit of a thought exercise right now. Picture in your head the average American sports fanatic. You don't have to tell me anything about them, but just picture them in your head. The kind of person you are picturing right now. Are we assuming that they are like a statistician? Do they have like a PhD in math? Are they a genius? No, probably not. That's probably not what your stereotype is telling you, but how many pieces of data could they tell you? How many obscure statistics about any player, any team could they tell you off the top of their head? People are very smart. Empower them. Data in and of itself is not confusing. And also another pushback, what about decisions, not options? Now, obviously, you guys are all pretty familiar with the WordPress community, and so you've all heard about decisions, not options, as the aspect that we shouldn't be presenting people with 5 billion different things to do. We should be kind of eliminating all the extraneous stuff and making the smart decisions for them, right? And this sounds like it's totally at odds with everything I was just saying about the adjacent in space concept, show everything and let the user decide. This sounds like it's basically counterintuitive to what the WordPress project is preaching. And the problem here is basically that we're kind of looking at decision fatigue, which is where you make too many decisions, which leads to making poor quality decisions or abandoning it altogether, versus empowering a user. And so we want to figure out, how do we empower this user without overwhelming them. So that's when you want to go into like UI and UX design. And the goal of the UI and UX designer is basically to guide people without restricting them. And so there's a few different ways that people go about doing that. One of those is onboarding, which enables people to get started quickly without needing to read a bunch of static instructions, because we all know that every single person reads every single instruction, right? This is also like practical training. Super great example of this is in video games. Now, I don't really play a lot of games, but I am friends with a lot of people who play games, and I watch a lot of people play games. And I've noticed in a lot of really successful games, you basically start playing right away. Like, they show you a couple of the basic controls at the beginning, but you're actually introduced to more complex actions as the game moves forward. Sometimes some games have little like mini games that are specifically to teach you how to do specific tasks. Like you could do like training, and it teaches you how to do specific moves or combos. Sometimes you're actually progressing through the plot of the game, and you get this helper text, like this image here has an example of helper text. It's not making you read through all these instructions first. It just tells you as you need that context, hey, here's how to do this thing that you probably need to do now. And as you play, that helper text gets less and less frequent as you master the control. So I think this is a great example of practical training and onboarding. Another one is basically emphasizing the setup and process steps. Now this is LinkedIn. Say what you will about LinkedIn. I know it's my super favorite social network of all time, and I'm definitely on there more often than once every month. But it actually has a decent onboarding experience now. Right here, you can definitely see the steps of what you're supposed to be doing. And then there's also like some gamification component to it, because they want to encourage you like, hey, you've only filled out some stuff. Like, you've only got an intermediate profile. Don't you totally want a strong profile? So that's kind of an example of gamification to encourage people to go through onboarding. Another method that I am a big fan of is progressive disclosure, and that's where you're basically showing the most important or high-level content first and then revealing more to a user as needed. And so I've got an example here in WordPress of contextual disclosure, where you're setting up recurrence for an event. And recurrence, if you've ever dealt with recurrence, is complicated, especially as you want to do more and more custom recurrence. So as you go through it, you want to add a recurrence, and then it gives you the option of picking, what kind of recurrence you want to do, and you decide to change that it's going to be a different time, and then you add a bunch more stuff. If you saw all of this data at the beginning, would you have known what to do with it? Like, this is a lot, right? But if you go back here, this is a lot more simple. Like, this is what you need to know to start with, and then it gets more complex as you go. The difference between this and like a wizard is that you can still see the context of where you came from. So all the necessary data is visible in the end. You can go back to any step and modify it. You're not stuck with it. And that's kind of the difference between this and a wizard. Another one is kind of this click to view more thing. So Twitter's got some of that happening. You've got the most common elements, the reply, the retweet, the like / favorite / heart, something about statistics. And then you've got a little menu for the less common stuff. This methodology of showing top-level menu items with a collapsed menu is something that's starting to replace the traditional hamburger menu in some mobile navigation as well, because you want to get the things people use the most up front so that they don't have to go behind another menu. Big one, and one that a lot of things in WordPress use often, is filtering and search. So example is a search with an autocomplete. So this is for a hypothetical project on the left that had this huge hierarchical thing where you can select from a billion different categories, and trying to scroll through the whole list is hard. You can if you want to, or you can just start typing and it'll start showing you the ones that are eligible, and then you can select them and they show up. So it's kind of this cool like filtering thing that lets you easily add stuff from a huge amount of data. On the right, that's just an example. I think it's an ACF, Advanced Custom Fields, where it's just showing the posts on your site and filtering it based on what you're typing so you can select them. So it's kind of nice. Another filtering example is, I mean, Amazon.com is a great one. There's lots of different ways of doing it. So this is an example of I'm looking for some bowls and I want them to be Prime, obviously, because I pay for Prime, and so I better be getting my money's worth. I want them to be dishwasher safe, not that I have a dishwasher, but a girl can dream. And I want them to be these specific brands. And I can see on the left, this is what I picked, and on the right, these are the results. And it refreshes as you are filtering them. Another example is just taxonomies, a list apart on the right-hand side, just extremely simple. Here's all of our different topics, and here's how many articles are in each topic. Just a really good way of starting to narrow that down. Something very easy to do in WordPress. That's something that's been built in for quite a long time. I think it's even one of the widgets that ships with core. Sortable columns is another great example. So this is my WooCommerce orders from my website, and you can see a lot of data here. I can filter by order number, I can apply some bulk actions to them, I can do some searching, but everything is kind of sortable by these columns, and it's really nice. It's a really easy way to scan through things. So that's some stuff that WordPress is doing pretty well. Another one to keep in mind is orientation and feedback. So telling the user where they are and what they are doing so that they feel more comfortable. Most basic example of that would be tooltips. So a little inline, I kind of like the inline tooltips better than the hover over tooltips because you can actually leave them toggled open and they stay kind of in context if you need the instructions rather than having to, go back and click on the little thing or hover over the little thing again. I think these are great for helper text, but pretty crappy for hiding functionality. So you don't want to like put actual useful functionality inside a tooltip, but if it's like a little bit of extra in context instructions, that's kind of nice. It's a little bit more approachable than a big block of instructions that no one's going to read. Useful error and validation messages. So one thing that I can't stand is when I'm typing in my account and password, and everyone can criticize me for not like using a password manager, fine. But hypothetically, I'm an average person and I am typing in my username and password and I just get like a sorry, that's not valid. And I'm like, well, what's not valid? Did I type in the wrong password or is this not my username? Like I am a million people on the internet, but it's like not useful information. So this is kind of nice because it's telling me, no, like that's not a username in our system. So I know I didn't screw up the password, I screwed up the username. That's just a little more useful. And then there's also these little like I forgot inline buttons, which are kind of nice because you can go right away to the relevant screen. Progress bars are great, letting people know where they are. So if you have to do multiple screens, if you have to do a stacked presentation with the ability to, you can see the context of your steps and navigate between them. In this specific one, it was designed so that you could see like green meant that you had already filled it out, orange meant that you filled part of it out, and blue meant that you hadn't gotten there yet, and white was the one that you were on. So it was a little bit more useful. We did have to show it on multiple screens, but people still had the context of where they were. Another example of progress bars, so here's Backup Buddy. I think it's got a pretty great progress bar because it shows you exactly what step you are in the thing. Now, obviously, this is not something I'm interacting with as a user, but I just think it's a nice example in WordPress of showing the steps that things are going through. Migrate DB Pro also has a very nice thing showing you where it's at in the process of migrating. So I like stuff like that because I know it's not just spinning and spinning like the WordPress import tool, cough. It's actually telling me what's going on. Another great one is breadcrumbs. Here's several different examples of breadcrumbs. Just so that you know where you are, there's Amazon, CNN, and this other site. I don't even know what site that is, but different kinds of breadcrumbs that you can see just to know where you are relative to anything else. It's really great for deep content where you end up several levels deep or several taxonomies deep, terms deep. You know where you are relative to anything else. So the goal here, again, to recap, is to reduce decision fatigue for your newer users, but enable your power users to execute tasks quickly because you don't want to do anything at the expense of the other. So to wrap up, and I do have these slides online, some super great resources if you want to know more. Nielsen, Norman Group, basically anything they write is just gold. So go read that. Pretty good article from Alyssa Part. A really good article also on Medium about designing enterprise UX. And then, of course, Edward Tufte, who has an ironically terrible website, but it's got really good information if you can find anything on it. It's super ironic. But anyway, here is my info. That's me everywhere. That is the link where my slides are at. I'll leave this up for a couple minutes while you guys come up with super genius things to ask me. The question about what the event plugin is, it is a feature of a well-known event plugin that will be existing soon. That's all I can say. New feature coming out soon for something that is well-known. Be excited. I am. So yeah, I guess I'll leave this up for like a minute or two more in case you want to write down any of that. And then I can go back to my face and you can connect with me personally, screen to screen. Radio silence. But you can put my face back on. Yeah, and also if you have any questions that aren't necessarily related to what I just talked about, but are just general design questions too, that's totally fine. Ooh, mobile menu designs, that's a good question. So the question is, what are my thoughts on mobile menu designs? I think that mobile menu design is a thing that is finally starting to be talked about. I am still using a basic hamburger menu for many of my client sites because my client sites are mostly brochure sites, like they're not really engaging, interesting content. I really like this concept of keeping the top level stuff accessible. I mean, stuff like Facebook and Twitter and all these apps are also doing that. So I really like that. I would like to explore that on other client sites, maybe ones that are more dynamic and interesting. I think that's a good way to go. I think that there is no one right answer, though. But I always have cop-out answers like that where I... Any other random... It can be any design question. It's totally cool. Otherwise, you can just look at my WAPU stuff in the background the whole time. I'm trying to think if there's anything else interesting. But yeah, if any of you guys ever get a chance to go to one of the Edward Tufte masterclasses, he does go around the country. I took one once, and he's a very interesting personality. He's definitely very interesting, but I think it's worth it. When you start from scratch, what comes first, content or design? Yeah, so content or design, that one's interesting. I don't necessarily, and I don't think any of us ever get final content at first, but what I do try to do is design for content types. So we can usually talk about like, okay, we expect to have lists of stuff here, images here, long form content here, and we can start talking about content blocks and start thinking modularly about it because they may not know the final words that they want to use, but we can talk about the size and scope of what that content is. So it's kind of like in between, right? I can't just like make up a design if I don't know what I'm designing for, but they may not know their final words yet. So that's I think it's a good compromise. Question on, do I have any thoughts on these artificial intelligence builders that scale design? Oh yeah, like the grid and all that stuff. I think those are actually, once they get good, they're gonna have their place. And I think they will actually benefit the design community because they solve the problems that don't pay well. And that sounds really out of context, that sounds mean. But there are certain clients that don't need custom design services, but they do need a web presence. That is why stuff like page builders and Wix and Squarespace and Beaver Builder or Divi or whatever, that's why all these things exist, right? Because people want things that look good, but they may not be able to afford or may not be able to work, like not understand the value yet of custom design. I think stuff like the artificial intelligence stuff, like the grid, will have a pretty good place solving like the lower level stuff that still needs to present their content. But as content gets more complex, I don't think that an algorithm can keep up with that, and I think that there will need to be a personal touch put on it. Any general advice or opinions around user documentation, tutorial, information design, and layout? Ooh, no, that's actually awesome, because documentation is usually forgotten about in, I don't have any specific examples. I wish I did. If anybody else has any, like, throw that into the chat, because I think that well-designed documentation is tough. Yeah, I don't have a good answer, sorry. I swear I've seen you at multiple WordCamps in one day, East Coast and West Coast. Are there two of you? Well, that would be giving away secrets, wouldn't it? Can't tell you that. Cool. Yeah, and like I said, the link, I will also post the link in the chat real quick after I'm done, so that you guys can have the link if you didn't write it down. I'm always available on Twitter or Slack or wherever. I'm Marketime Media everywhere on the internet, so you can find me and bother me. Cool. I can sit here awkwardly in silence for a while. Wondering about search boxes. Designed for current site, very complex, doesn't show any search. Where to put it? Ooh, I can't really give you a specific, like, where should you put this, because I have no idea what the design looks like. But I do want to bring up that search is actually a really good and important way of empowering users to find stuff. And unfortunately, is kind of crappy with WordPress, because native WordPress search is okay, but it only searches native WordPress stuff. And so you end up having to use something like ElasticPress or SearchWP, but it's very, very important. And I think that I think more of us should be, me included, I think more of us should be making sure to bake search in. I usually end up putting search, in the top, and like a permanently accessible top menu that's always there, like kind of a persistent view menu. But that's just me. It depends on the site. Designing for accessibility, how does that work into building complex designs? Well, I'm actually probably not the best person to answer questions specifically about accessibility. I know that you should always try to build things semantically, and you don't want to hide content that's necessary or important. So, like, again, that's oversimplifying things often kind of goes against making them accessible, because you're constantly putting them behind hovers or clicks or extra things. I'm probably not good to give an answer beyond that, though, because while I'm like aware of everything, I am still learning a lot about accessibility. So I think that'd be something interesting to pose on Twitter, though. I bet people have really good opinions about that. Pop-up subscribe boxes. How do we grab user info in a polite way? Yeah, I can't stand those. I understand why they exist. Like, I understand that, but I heard a really good analogy I think we were at WordCamp Los Angeles, maybe, or no, WordCamp Orange County. Los Angeles is coming up soon. WordCamp Orange County, like, it was like getting propositioned when you haven't been taken out to dinner yet. You know, like, it's kind of like, wow, like, I literally just got here. Please don't ask me to give you my info. It makes more sense to ask somebody who maybe has actually interacted with your site or actually read an entire page first before making them sign up for something, right? Like, that's kind of, so I think if you're gonna do stuff like that, like, give people a chance to be on your site for a little while first and decide that they like you, like, date them a little bit. Yeah. What's my overall opinion of core WordPress UI UX, specifically the WordPress dashboard? I think it's good. It's not great, and I think everybody knows that. I think that there is a lot of information there by default that isn't useful to most people anymore and is very like artifact of where it came from. I think like the aesthetic improvements that they made a while ago with the MP6 stuff was great. I think now we're going to have to think a little bit more about what's the most important. I've worked on some hypothetical admin customization projects that were really interesting and made me think about like, what if we could really customize the admin per what the user use case is? And there's some plugins that try to help with that a little bit. I think it would be interesting to see more flexibility there, like me being able to, I know there's ways of doing this, but more intuitively and graphically, or I don't know. I know there's programmatic ways of doing it, but I'd like to be able to customize what I see there more based on my use case, because it does get cluttered, it does get crazy. I know that you can hide things programmatically, you can hide things via screen options, but I think that it's something people are thinking about now. I think that it's going to get better. I'm probably going to stalk it and listen to the conversation and hopefully chime in, because I've done some hypothetical stuff on it and it might be interesting. One of my favorite examples of a mobile menu. See, I'm always bad at coming up with specific examples at, you know, on the spot. In terms of a pattern, I really like the pattern of semi-persistent menus. So like on desktop, a menu that kind of like shrinks and stays there. I also know people that really hate that, especially people that have a hard time like with animation or motion. So I can see how that would be problematic. But I like that kind of semi-persistent menu. I like on mobile, when you scroll up a little bit, the menu comes back rather than having to scroll all the way back to the top. I don't like it coming back instantaneously when I scroll up, because sometimes I just want to go back and read a couple words. But I like it when, you know, maybe you scroll up like 100 pixels or 200 pixels and the menu comes back. I like that, because then they assume that's why I'm trying to scroll up. What do you feel we will see come into web design in the future? I think there will definitely be a lot more stuff automating bottom level stuff. So like stuff like the grid, stuff like page builders, a lot of the bottom level stuff is probably going to be automated or dealt with in some way. I think also that there's going to be a lot more with, and stuff, this is all like stuff that I don't even know that much about, but like the context that you're in, right? I just read like a really good blog article about like the future of like context-aware design. Like what happens when you are in like a dark room and the website changes color to accommodate? Like how cool is that? I bet there's going to be more of that. That's pretty cool. What do I do when politics go against what I know is right in UI? Well, luckily I work for myself, so I don't have to deal with coworkers or bosses telling me stuff. With clients, usually I guess I'm picking clients now that want to collaborate with me and listen and come to a good agreement. What I do want to say though, for all these things where you're trying to like communicate with a client and I don't know, I guess convince them of things. Remember to be empathetic that they have a lot of experience in their business. And if they're trying to suggest a ridiculous thing, like I want the logo to be bigger, I want 5 billion things crammed into a slider, blah, blah, blah. That's usually from like a fear response that something that you're suggesting isn't like meeting something that they want. And so it's good to like get to the bottom of why they are asked, like, okay, so why do you want the logo bigger? And they're like, oh, well, I feel like we have no brand recognition on this page. Like it's an afterthought. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like we can work on that. Or I feel like no one's going to notice it because the whole website's super loud. Okay, we can work on that. Like now we've actually got a problem to solve. So I think for all those different things, also for like the client where every piece of content doesn't belong on the homepage or they want the logo bigger or blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff is really about like having an actual conversation about why that's happening. okay, in my opinion, what does a person need to do to consider themselves a designer? And what does a person need to do to consider themselves a developer? Oh, Aaron. Yeah, that one's interesting. Like, I've had people tell me that I am a developer, and I guess I am, in that I do like theme development and front end stuff, but then I hang out with a whole bunch of like super smart back end developers and core committers all the time, so I don't like feel like a developer, right? And then I go hang out with my design friends, and they're like, you're totally a developer. But then I hang out with all my developer friends, and they're like, you're totally a designer. I think that for both of those questions, though, it's really about being able to answer why you did something, whether it's code or design. Like, if you're being deliberate about it. Obviously, there are different levels of design, and there are different levels of developer. You can be a beginning developer. You can be a beginning designer. But I think really considering yourself going down that path, whether it's designer or developer, is that you're putting critical thought into the things you're doing and can answer why you are doing them. Now, it might be wrong, or there might be a better way, but at least you're starting to go down that path of making decisions for a reason, and not just because you copied and pasted it from somewhere and don't understand it at all. So I think that's the big one. How important do I think it is for the developer and designer to collaborate before designs are presented to the client? Super important. I've actually given talks about that specifically. I believe that designers and developers are on the same team. I don't like the waterfall model at all. I think it's terrible. I think that, designers and developers should have empathy for each other and understand and respect and be able to communicate with each other. And, you can't expect a designer to spec development work, and you can't expect a developer to spec design work, but they should be both on the same team. And if they are separate people, they at least like the head of the design department and the head of the development department, if you're in a big company, you should talk to each other, right? So yeah, I think it's super, super, super important, and I will fight for that forever. That'll be my mission in life. Oh, have any ideas on how to avoid / improve the large image tagline button header? Yeah, like that's what my website looks like. I'm not saying that it's not a trope because it doesn't work. Like, it certainly does work, especially when you're communicating more visual stuff, right? But I think that the important thing is not that it's bad, but that if it doesn't fit your content, don't make it happen. So I think it does fit my content for my website, because my website's just a simple portfolio and contact page. So having a big image with a tagline and a button, that's like all I need, right? Because I want you to get in touch with me. But I'm not doing anything complex. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not trying to be a membership site. I definitely think that the large image tagline button header thing is better than the slider thing. So we've gone sort of in the right direction. Conversations about image weight and videos and the size of the internet notwithstanding. But I don't know. I always say it depends. I'm the worst at answering questions. It depends on your project. But maybe that makes me a good designer. I don't know. Anything else? I answered a lot of things. Look at that. You guys had good questions, by the way. That was super fun. That was fun. Aw, thanks, WordSesh. I think you're great at having a WordSesh. Cool. I don't know if I could maybe just like wrap up a little early. That would be cool. I need some water. Oh yeah, everybody's on different time zones. That's really interesting. Cool. Well, I think then I don't know how to stop this because I'm not in control of this. But yeah, 10-minute break. Thanks, everybody.